Dr. Krishnadas for this session on glaucoma. Then I would like to invite Dr. Mayuri as co-chairman. Myself and Dr. Ganesh are moderators for this session. And I would like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Sonali, for history taking on glaucoma.
Good afternoon to one and all. Revered chairperson, esteemed convener and moderator, respect to my senior colleagues.
Please share your screen.
Please share your screen.
Is it visible?
Yes, continue.
Good afternoon to one and all. Revered chairperson, esteemed convener and moderator, respect to my senior colleagues. My heartfelt thanks to the organizers of the 79 AIOC Scientific Committee team to give me an opportunity to speak a few lines on the relevant history of glaucoma. As we can see here that the meta-analysis show that in the year 2020, the overall burden of glaucoma is 76.02 million, and meta-analysis future says that by the year of 2040, it will be around 111.8 million. So it is very important to ask certain questions to the patient so as to screen and identify the higher risk target population so as to decrease the burden of glaucoma globally. As we can see here, that the prevalence of primary open-angle glaucoma is mostly seen above the age of 40 years, and it is mostly seen in case of Africans, followed by Hispanics. And in case of PACG, again, it is seen above the age of 40 years, and mostly seen in case of African, followed by South Asian population. Secondary glaucomas comprises of about 4 to 18% of all glaucoma cases. We can see that studies show that men are more commonly affected as compared to that of the females in case of open angle glaucomas, and in case of angle closure glaucomas, females are 4 times more affected as compared to that of the men counterparts. Usually, the complaints of the patients are asymptomatic unless and until they have a severe form of glaucoma where they complain of subjective loss of vision and subjective visual field difference in case of advanced glaucoma. In case of PACG, they complain of pain and redness, headache and vomiting associated with blurred vision and halos in case of acute angle closure glaucoma, and blurred vision without halos is seen in case of secondary angle closure glaucoma, such as in case of malignant glaucoma. So family history of glaucoma is of paramount importance because mutations of genes such as in case of POCAG has shown that the sibling risk is about 4 times as compared to that of the normal population, and offspring is about 2 times as compared to that of the normal population. And case of sibling risk in case of PACG is about 3.5 times as compared to that of normal population. First, ocular history, myopia, it is seen that it has an association of 4.2% of eyes with low myopia and 4.4% of eyes with moderate to high myopia as compared to 1.5% of eyes without myopia, which carries a 2 to 3-fold increased risk of glaucoma as compared to non-myopic eyes. And its study shows that if it is more than 6 diopter myopia, it is associated with glaucomatous optic neuropathy. Hypermetropia, it is seen that in case of, it is mostly associated in case of PACG, where they have actual length less of about 0.5 to 1 mm shorter as compared to the normal population, and it is seen that their anterior chamber depths are also small compared to that of the normal population. So usually after trauma, we can see that the 6 months incidence of post-traumatic glaucoma is around 3.39%. So past history of trauma is also important. The patient may present with hypema or anterior subluxation of lens, and gonioscopically may give rise to angle recession and cyclodialysis cleft. So previous ocular inflammation is also important because uveitis, keratitis, and scleritis may also give rise to secondary glaucomas. Lens status, phacomorphic as well as phacolytic glaucomas can also give rise to secondary glaucoma, and also pseudophakic and aphakic eyes. Previous eye surgery such as penetrating keratoplasty, it is seen as immediate post-operative glaucoma, it is seen around 9%, and chronic post-keratoplastic glaucoma, it is seen around 18%. In case of scleral buckling, it may give rise to increase in IOP, as in case of 4 to 7% of cases, and also SO injection, that is silicone oil injection, may give rise to increase in IOP in 2.2 to 56% of population. Anti-VEGF therapy has also given rise to, can give rise to increase in IOP, more so see in case of bevacizumab as compared to that of ranibizumab. Previous laser refractive surgeries have also shown, because more the ablation, there is more underestimation of IOP by GAP. Past systemic history is also important, because diabetes has been shown there is an association of open angle glaucoma as compared different studies such as Beaver Dam study and also Blue Mountain Eye study also show that there is an association of diabetes and primary open angle glaucoma. Hypertension has also shows there is an increased risk of IOP and glaucoma. Patients, those who are having asthmatic and heart disease, they are contraindicated for beta blockers. So this history is also important. Patients having arthritis, especially those who are associated with HLA-B27, can also have a recurrent uveitis and are associated for secondary glaucomas. Patients having migraine are significantly more commonly associated with normotensive glaucoma, around 28% as compared to that of the control. Hypothyroidism has also shown that it may be associated with raised scleral pressure and raised intraocular pressure. Sleep apnea has been shown that in 5-year period of subjects with sleep apnea syndrome, they are associated with 1.67 times as compared to that of the normal individuals. Certain sulfur-based drugs such as topiramate can give bilateral acute angle closure glaucomas. Steroids and contraceptive pills, they also carry a risk for glaucoma. Certain yoga postures such as upside down body changes or sirsasana, as we commonly say, can also give rise to increase in IOP and can cause visual field progression. Cigarette smoking has also a risk factor in primary open-angle glaucoma. It is seen that people are 1.3 times more affected for current smokers and 1.03 for past smokers as compared to that of the non-smokers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sonali Sarangi, for an explicit talk on what history is relevant in glaucoma. Now we will move to our next topic, which is by Dr. Shiraz Ali, and why IOP measurement is glaucoma, and why GAT, that is Goldmann Applanation Tonometer, is the gold standard. So over to you.
Is my slides visible?
Yes.
A very good afternoon to all of you. The technology used to estimate intraocular pressure has evolved tremendously. IOP estimation by tactile assessment is the simplest and the easiest way to perform tonometry. Unfortunately, the IOP estimation is notoriously unreliable in most of the cases. This slide depicts the classification of tonometers. In routine clinical practice, we are interested only in the indirect method of tonometry. The two basic types of clinical tonometers differ according to the shape of deformation of the globe that is produced by the tonometer. It is a truncated cone with indentation tonometry and a simple flattening with applanation tonometry. Coming back to the classification, the most commonly used applanation tonometers can be of two types, the non-contact types and the contact types. The contact types are further differentiated on the basis of the variable that is measured. Fixed area variable force tonometers measure the force that is required to applanate a standard area of the corneal surface. The prototype is the Goldmann Applanation Tonometer. Fixed force variable force tonometers measure the area of the cornea that is flattened by a known force. The prototype is the Maklakov tonometer. And there are some tonometers that are a hybrid of applanation and indentation tonometers. The prototype is the Mackey-Mark tonometer. And there are still some other tonometers that do not depend on indentation or applanation principles. The prototype is the DCT. The Scheid tonometer is cumbersome as the patient needs to assume a supine position, but it is affordable, robust, and has no complicated electronics. Therefore, it is suitable for screenings, especially in low resource and remote settings. The Scheidt tonometer does not make as precise measurements as other types of tonometers, as the measurements are influenced by a number of factors. Impact tonometry, also called rebound tonometry, in which a lightweight magnetic probe in an enclosed shaft is propelled towards the cornea, and the rebound characteristics of the probe are measured, has shown quite promise. The Goldman applanation tonometer is based on the Imbert-Fick law. GAT uses an ablating force to flatten a constant area of 7.35 millimeters square. At this selected area, the forces of tear surface tension pulling the tonometer tip towards the eye and the corneal elasticity pushing the tip pushing the tip away are almost equal and opposite. When the tip of the biprism approximates the cornea, the biprism splits the circle of contact into two semicircles. If the two semicircles are properly aligned, they undergo a rhythmic movement in response to the cardiac cycle. The tension knob is rotated until the inner borders of the fluorescein rings touch each other at the midpoint of their pulsations. Factors such as central corneal thickness, corneal biomechanical factors, inappropriate amounts of fluorescein dye, pressure applied on the eyelids, Valsalva maneuver, breath holding, and high astigmatism can all affect the accuracy of measurements taken with the GAT. The Perkins tonometer uses the same principle as GAT, but is portable and can be used in any position. The commonly used NCT is an applanation tonometer which uses a column of air to flatten the non-anesthetized cornea. The advantages of the NCT include its non-contact nature, and it does not require topical anesthesia or installation of fluorescein dye. The TonoPen is an electronic portable version of the Mackay Mark tonometer. It is particularly useful for irregular corneas as the area of applanation is small, about 2.36 millimeters square. The pneumotonometer measures IOP by calculating the force required to flatten an area of cornea using an elastic membrane inflated with gas or air. Pneumotonometry provides reasonably accurate IOP readings across the range of corneal thicknesses and corneal pathology. Additionally, it can be used against the sclera near the limbus, with IOP results nearly identical to those achieved by corneal contact. Recently, instruments have been developed that measure IOP through the eyelid over the sclera, obviating the need for topical anesthesia and the risk of eye-to-eye transfer of infection. While these instruments generally are not accurate enough for regular clinical use, they may have some value in approximating IOP when ornitometry is not possible, such as with corneal prosthesis and totally scarred corneas. GAT is the gold standard, and it is a well-accepted fact also that significant errors in GAT IOP measurements are mostly related to patient variability in the corneal biomechanical factors. These limitations of GAT have spurred researchers to develop alternatives. The ocular response analyzer uses a rapid air pulse to record two applanation pressures. One applanation pressure is recorded while the cornea is moving inwards during applanation, and the second is measured while the cornea is moving outwards while recovering from applanation. The average of the two gives Goldman corrected IOP, and the difference gives corneal hysteresis. In the dynamic contour tonometer, the tip of the probe matches the contour of the cornea, and this approach eliminates the influences of the corneal biomechanical factors. The instrument measures IOP in both diastolic and systolic phases of the cardiac cycle, and the difference in the two is called the ocular pulse amplitude. The Corvus ST is a novel device that employs non-contact, bidirectional air puff applanation and also provides a corneal compensated IOP measurement. No single tonometer is accurate or usable in all situations. In conditions like gas-filled eyes, over soft contact lenses, corneal pathologies, keratoconus, and post-laser refractive eyes, the pneumotonometer and the TonoPen are particularly useful. In addition, the DCT gives reliable measurements in keratoconus and post-laser refractive eyes. In eyes with corneal prosthesis, transpalpebral tonometers are useful devices, and when these are not available, one has to depend only on tactile assessment. Measuring pressure in children is not easy. For this special group, the Perkins, the NCT, and the rebound tonometers are particularly useful. Despite the many limitations, it can still be argued that the Goldman applanation tonometer remains the gold standard for IOP measurement. The GATT is the reference standard due to its historical use in most clinical practice and the extensive publications on its validity, reliability, and reproducibility. Most eye practitioners like the GATT because it is easy to understand the mechanism and principles of GATT as compared to the new tonometers like the DCT or ORA, which are much more complicated. New tonometers must agree with GATT to check the accuracy of the readings. GATT is familiar, comfortable, and less stressful to use than to change to a new tonometer. The economic argument is the strongest in favor of GATT. It is relatively cheap compared to other high-tech instruments. So my take-home message, no single tonometer is accurate or usable in all situations. Most new technologies for measuring IOP fail to measure up to the GATT. Despite the Goldman's limitations, it remains the gold standard for IOP measurement. The important point is not to change techniques when you're following an individual patient. Thank you for kind hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. It was really an extensive talk, but you covered very well all the points. Now we will have a debate on CCT. So for CCT for all would be taken by Dr. Reshma Jhaveri, and CCT only when required will be taken by Dr. Arpita. So you have both of you have 4 minutes each. So you can start sharing. Dr. Reshma first.
Dr. Siraj, please stop sharing your slides.
Okay, madam, just a minute. Okay. Yeah, I have stopped.
Yes, Dr. Reshma, you can start now. You can see your slides.
Can't hear.
Can you just go to your first slide and start again, because we cannot hear you.
I request all others to mute their mic.
Is Reshma talking?
Unmute yourself, please. Dr.
Reshma, please unmute yourself. We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. And I'd like to thank the AIS for allowing me for this wonderful platform today. My talk is on CCT. Is it an important tool? Okay. So 1,000 known enemies are better than one unknown enemy. And as we know, and as how Dr. Shiraz just spoke, that how GAT is one of the most important and the best way of measuring the pressures. So first of all, what are the risk factors of glaucoma? We all know that it has many risk factors such as age, race, sex, refractive error, systemic disease, trauma, intraocular pressure, family history, and corneal thickness. So what is the importance of corneal thickness? Why do we need to know the corneal thickness of every glaucoma patient? Corneal thickness is important because it can mask an accurate reading of the eye pressure. Actual intraocular pressure may be underestimated in patients with thinner central corneal thickness and overestimated in patients with thicker central corneal thickness. There have been many studies which have shown the same, and that corneal thickness measurements seen in the management of primary open angle glaucomas. There's a strong evidence that measuring CCT is an important component of complete ocular examination, particularly those who are getting tested for POAG. There are many other studies that have shown that it has to be implemented as a routine for the measurement of all patients having glaucoma. Now, why is it important? It is important because a thin cornea, can be a danger of misreading eye pressures. Many times patients with thin corneas, less than 550, show artificially low IOP readings. This is dangerous because if actual IOP is higher than the reading shows, the patient may be at risk for developing glaucoma. So if it is left untreated, higher IOPs can lead to glaucoma and visual loss. Whereas a thicker cornea, patients who have a thick cornea more than 550, this means their pressures is actually lower than what it is thought, and that their risk of developing glaucoma is low, and they may land up in getting treated even if they are not required. Also, there is a possibility that the thinner corneas indicate a thin, more flexible sclera, and that this is the difference in scleral stiffness causing an increased susceptibility of retinal ganglion cells in individuals. There is no question that the corneal thickness affects the likelihood of developing glaucoma, and that this trait is genetic. Corneal thickness is one of the factors in a complex interaction between genetic and environment that contributes to overall risk. So there is a link of gene theory and a corneal thickness, that there is also a controlling thickness that might cause sensitivity and elevated IOP in a population causing this. So I would like to talk about this case who came to me, 37 years old female, first time 5 years back. No family history of glaucoma, refractive error is also not very high. First time she came with the pressures of 28 and 26, fundus normal, gonio narrow angle, no cynic care, very thin corneas, a very small pupil,
You have 1 minute left.
4 and which is now my point is that she has an extremely thin cornea and the pressures were under control. She's on high drops. Now thin corneas means I had an add of +4. Now she's at a 23, 24. Everything else is normal. She's already on three drops. That's where I feel that CCT is also very important for us to understand what we should aim as our target pressure. So it does have its own limitations. Okay, but advantages are that it is a really CCT to measure a pachymetry is a very easy tool. It's not consuming, it's not expensive, and is very important when deciding target IOP. And also it has been suggested as a glaucoma risk factor. So I'd like to summarize that improved understanding of central corneal thickness and biometry properties may someday lead to a better understanding of glaucoma risk and assessment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Reshma. Now I would like to invite Dr. Arpita to talk on CCT only when it is required. You can start sharing your slides now.
Good afternoon, all. I will be speaking on this central corneal thickness only when required and not for glaucoma. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
So,
Yes.
So we have a well-equipped center with all the modern gadgets, and I often advise CCT to my patients. But for this, as indicated by the opponent, and for this particular presentation, I asked the MRDs of last 1 month of my glaucoma patients, and I picked up only those MRDs where I have not ordered the CCT. So I am discussing few cases with you. The first case is 72-year-old male who complained of eye pain and headache from last 2 years.
Unmute के बाजू में.
He was hypertensive and diabetic. His best corrected visual acuity was 6.6 with plus cylinders, and AC was quite shallow. So I measured the intraocular pressure. It was 34 in the right eye and 38 in the left eye. Rest of the things were normal. Then I looked at the undilated disc. In the right eye, it was around 0.3 cupping, which was almost like normal. In the left eye, yes, but I could pick up a superior notch with 0.8 cupping. So I did the gonioscopy. The angles were closed, which were optimal indentation. The blotchy pigments were present. So with this, I made a diagnosis of right eye primary angle closure and left eye primary angle closure glaucoma. And I advised the PI. So PI was done and the patient was started on timolol. And the intraocular pressure did drop from 34 to 15 and 38 to 17. Post PI, I only did the field test and the fundus examination, fundus photos. In follow-up also, this patient is doing good. The pressures are well under control and the fields are stable. As you can see, in the right eye, the HPF is almost like normal. In the left eye, a superior notch was there. There is an inferior incomplete ulcerate. So the CCT was never done and there was no need felt for it. So we can say in all primary glaucomas with present with high intraocular pressure like primary open angle glaucoma, juvenile open angle, primary angle closure, CCT is not mandatory as intraocular pressure is a percentage of the baseline intraocular pressure. Now coming to a secondary glaucoma case, here is this is a 20-year-old female who came for a glaucoma opinion, was on steroids for long and was on maximum medical therapy from last 1 year. Her best corrected visual acuity was half meter finger counting. She was a high myope and the intraocular pressure was 39 in the right eye and 34 in the left eye. That is on maximum medical treatment. The positive findings were corneal opacity with increased corneal diameter and with a stretch limbus. The cupping was around 0.9 with bipolar notch and the pupil was fixed mid dilated. As there was a stretch limbus, so the diagnosis we made was Werner keratoconjunctivitis with developmental glaucoma with superended steroid insult and moderate myopia. As we know that it was a stretch limbus, so I preferred doing glaucoma drainage devices, AGV in the right eye and RV in the left eye. Now this patient is quite stable. The intraocular pressure was 19 in the right eye and 12 in the left eye in the follow-ups, and the tube was well in place. So CCT was again never done and felt no need of it. So you see in the secondary glaucomas which are recognized only by high intraocular pressure, CCT is of no use. Intraocular pressure need to be at lowest level possible in such cases with surgery or maximum medical therapy irrespective of the central corneal thickness. CCT has no role in developmental glaucoma also. So my take-home message is don't get disheartened if you don't have ways to measure CCT. For glaucoma diagnosis, intraocular pressure, conioscopy, disc examination, and your clinical acumen give you the best diagnosis. Now, you will agree with me, many a times we order CCT as it's a part of glaucoma investigations at our centers, but your treatment is least affected by it. So, what matters most at the end, whether your patient is progressing or not progressing on frontal visual field. If not progressing over years, you won't mind even a borderline of higher intraocular pressure.
Your time is up. Yeah, just sum up.
Last slide. If
Yeah.
progressing, you will anyway plant trab or implant, even if IOP is less than 20, again, irrespective of central corneal thickness. Thank you.
Thank you both for finishing in time. So the topic is open for discussion for 2 minutes. We can discuss and have questions on this. Dr. Mayuri?
I have to make only one comment. There is nobody is nowadays doing any addition or subtraction. It is not a scientific way of doing it. It is just a knowledge that it is a thin cornea. So this patient is at a higher risk for the progression. That is what I do for all my patients.
Yeah, Dr. Krishnadas?
I agree with Dr. Mayuri. Both of them presented their aspects very well. But I would summarize that at least to have an overall idea of the near accurate intraocular pressure and to some extent prognosticate the CCT as a risk factor. Thin CCT have a higher risk of progression. So at least to have an idea of these things, we must measure corneal thickness in all eyes, irrespective of the diagnosis. It may not be 100% possible in peripheral clinics, but in facilities where there are pachymeters available, it should be measured as a part of the glaucoma evaluation.
Yeah, it's like a one piece of puzzle in glaucoma. So you have to measure a CCT and keep a record of it. Obviously, in secondary glaucomas, the pressure is more important where it is very high, but still CCT also counts in that also.
Yeah,
So
and
we will
Arpita
go
did well. It was more difficult to speak against the necessity of CCT, and I think she did well.
Yes, sir.
Actually, sir, I am also advising CCT in almost all
I know.
my patients.
Yeah.
Then for this particular presentation, I choose those files where CCT I didn't advise, and I presented those cases.
True. Your arguments were quite persuasive.
Yes,
Thank you.
nice presentation.
What we can conclude from this is CCT is more important for the primary glaucomas rather than secondary glaucoma.
Just one question, madam.
Yeah.
After how much interval should these CCT measurements should be repeated?
Unless there is a surgery done or something has been done, I do not repeat it very often.
Yeah, actually there was a paper which showed that it's 0.003 reduction is there per year. So it's not significant. So
as-
maybe, as Mayuri said, if there is any intervention, you can just check and re-record it.
And the different studies, ma'am, just an addition to that, just the different studies, they are saying that it is 3 to 5 micron, which is deteriorating every per decade. So that's a
Yeah,
very minimal
that's
amount.
right.
as you said,
Very
sir.
small amount, and it has been affected with the PG analog use.
Yes, ma'am.
But,
So
not
whenever the
significant.
many
The time is
treatments-
over for the discussion. Can go for the next talk,
Yeah.
please.
Okay.
We have Dr. Mayuri Kamar, who's going to be going next. I request Dr. Mayuri to please start the screen share.
Thank you everyone for giving me this chance to share my views, how to do the gonioscopy and when and how. I will try to summarize it as fast as I can. Why do we need to perform gonioscopy? It is a fundamental part of the comprehensive examination done initially for all glaucoma patients or the glaucoma suspect with the shallow chamber. It should be repeated periodically. I do repeat it yearly, and it helps not only for grading of the antechamber angle, but differential diagnosis of secondary glaucoma. In congenital glaucoma, also we do the gonioscopy on table, and it helps us in a proper diagnosis as well as giving the prognosis. It is also helpful in the assessment of the change in the angle morphology after LPI, and one should be master if he wants to do the laser trabeculoplasty. Various methods are there, indirect and direct gonioscopy, and indirect can be again modified into the indentation or dynamic gonioscopy and the manipulative gonioscopy. Various direct and indirect gonio lenses are available. Indirect gonio lens is very handy for the OPD purpose. One can use a 1, 2, or 3 mirror Coleman or the Zeiss 4 mirror. The 4 mirror gonio lens has a smaller corneal diameter, the base and the flat base, so the cutting solution is not required, and it is possible to indent the center of the cornea. But the disadvantage is sometimes it induces the compression folds. The one who is in a learning phase can have that folds more in the cornea, and the stabilization of the block is difficult. So the direct gonio lens is used mainly for the surgical aspect in the pediatric patients, and nowadays with a lot of MIGS coming up, one should learn to use the direct gonio lens. Now this is to show you the technique of how to do the gonioscopy. As I understand, a lot of junior doctors are there. Patient should be comfortably seated on the chair, and the room light should be dim. This is very important. And the illumination system and microscope are perpendicular to the pupil. Try to use the smaller slit in the beginning and the low magnification. Now pull the lower lid with your index finger, put the edge of the gonio lens in the lower edge, and then top it on the cornea. And now ask patient to look behind you at the distant object to avoid the accommodation. So, and first, when you start, use the maximum height parallel to the axis of the mirror, vertical for vertical angle and horizontal slit on the horizontal angles. And avoid the entering the pupil, otherwise it will constrict the pupil and you will have an opening up of the angle. And this is how we can do the parallelopipe. I will discuss that in later part. So the angle is closed, and now on indentation, you can just push the iris away and you can see the opening up of the angle. Now the informational goal for the primary glaucoma is this angle open or closed in its natural position? If this angle closure is there, is this the synechial closure or the appositional closure? And if this angle is open, is this angle is occludable? So how do we interpret the gonioscopy? First, look at the angle structures which are visible, which decides the narrowness and openness of the angle. Look at the iris configuration, particularly peripheral part, and the pattern, which decides the occludability as well as syndromes and abnormal features like pigments, blood vessels, and exudates in the angle. So precise identification of the angle structure shown in this slide. The first, that white glistening pointing line that you see is the Scholl baseline. The next to this is the pigmented and non-pigmented part of trabecular meshwork. And the white line posterior to that is scleral spur, and the gray zone that you see in the wide open angles is angle recess. And various classifications are available. It is your own way of doing it. The speech system gives you the angle width, site of iris insertion as well as the peripheral iris curvature. This is how the iris insertion can be documented as A, B, C, depending upon the position of iris insertion, and look at the configuration of the iris, whether it is the convex configuration like this tip or the regular, or it is square or the concave, particularly with the myopic eye or the pigmentary glaucoma patients. And then the measurement of the angle width is done looking at the where the iris is and the trabecular meshwork. It is shown in this. And then this visibility of the structure, how many structures you see, you decide the grading of the angle. Here the iris is directly in contact with the cornea, so this is grade 0. Here part of the meshwork is seen, it is grade 2. This is grade 3, scleral spur is visible all throughout, and this is the gray zone visible, which is grade 4. Now, if there is angle closure, then you can do the manipulative gonioscopy if you are not using the 4-mirror gonio lens. Over the heel phenomenon has to be used. Ask patient to look into the direction of mirror. For example, the mirror is superiorly, then ask patient to look up and then tilt the lens towards the center. That will allow light rays to enter the angle area. Now, indentation gonioscopy, as I said, it has a small corneal diameter and flat base. So it indents the center of the cornea, pushes aqueous into the periphery. So if it is oppositional closure, it opens up the, you can see the angle, but if it is permanent cynical closure, you cannot. So indentation or dynamic gonioscopy allow quick evaluation of the angle structure and enables us to differentiate how much is the angle closure. Now this is an example of close angle, nothing is visible. And then you indent and you can see the scleral spur is, or Schwalbe's line is here. This is the trabecular meshwork and iris being pushed back. So occludable angle, another example. And here you can see the patchy pigment, which is a sign of the previous intermittent angle closure. So another way of identifying is to make a corneal wedge. The anterior and posterior surface of the cornea is seen. It is there is an apex here. And the sclera and iris, they are opaque, and that's why it's a single line. So,
can others please mute?
So this is how you
Please
can
go ahead,
the
madam.
apex where it is going. Here, the apex is not seen and the iris line is seen. So this is a close angle, but this is a pigmentary glaucoma misdiagnosed as the enclosure. The Schwalbe's line is here. This is the part of the angle, and you can see the concave iris configuration. Now, this is a typical example of the plateau iris configuration. Double hump sign is seen because of the anteriorly rotated. Now, the PAS has to be differentiated from the iris surface. This is a wavy border. Intermittent angle is grade 2, and you can see the broad base synechiae typical of the angle closure. Now, this is the how I document all my cases. The posterior structure seen should be documented in this. It is ciliary body and how much is the pigmentation of the meshwork and the configuration of the iris. These are the abnormal things that one can look for. Now, this is also helpful in differentiating the variety of the pigmentation. This is a newborn angle. There is hardly any pigmentation. Here it is grade 1, just visible. And this is grade 3 with irregularity or patchy pigmentation. And this is the pigmentary glaucoma. Krukenbach spindles are seen, and the trabecular meshwork is fully covered with the pigments. And this is the Sampolis line that you see. So this is how one has to grade the angle. This is a post-operative inflammatory glaucoma, secondary glaucoma. You can see the black dots on the iris, and jet black pigments is covering the whole angle. That's why it was an intractable glaucoma in this patient. Now, lacy cord-like small processes are that of the iris processes should be differentiated from the goniosynechiae, which are broad, tent up, and the taut, and they do not contract on the light. This is a single goniosynechiae reaching up to the Schwalbe's line. So gripping angle closure is another variety. You can see the angle which has been closed with the patchy pigments. And this is the window getting blocked by the perisynechiae. Now the traumatic glaucoma has to be differentiated. This is the actual angle and this is the restressed angle. You can see the gray zone here with the irregularity, and black ball sign is a sign of the previous IFEMA that is also seen in the inferior angle. Another case showing the angle recession, one has to document how much angle is being covered. Now pseudo exfoliation is the where there is a pigmentation which is more than normal, but it is patchy, but not as much as the pigmentary glaucoma, and one can see the dandruff kind of material in the angle. The window of the trabeculectomy is showing the packs. The normal blood vessels are solitary and do not arborize in the angle and never reaches the Schwalbe's line, while the abnormal vessels are fine superficial branching and arborization is seen, and eventually it pulls the iris into the angle and close the angle totally. Inflammatory glaucoma has to be differentiated from by looking at the iris pattern, and you can elicit the Amsler sign. If you are lucky, you can see the angle filling up while doing the gonioscopy. The tumors need the documentation, silicone oil. Now last slide, I will show you the childhood glaucoma, where there is an abnormal pattern of the iris in the periphery, mesodermal processes are seen. So we'll stop here as I have overshooted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mayuri. This was an excellent talk and the slides are really, really good. So now next is my topic on optic nerve head. So I will start sharing my screen. So my topic is optic disc assessment and not cup disc ratio alone. So always do careful exam and keep an open mind. Evaluation of ONH and RNFL needs a systematic approach because this improves detection of glaucoma. ONH signs have high sensitivity and specificity for diagnosis of glaucoma. Clinical evaluation can be done by direct ophthalmoscopy, but it has limited advantage. It lacks stereopsis. This can be done, stereoscopic examination can be done by slit lamp and non-contact lenses of 78 or 90D. Goldman, Zeiss 4-mirror lenses are also available, and you need to do a detailed drawing. Documentation can be done with the help of color and red-free photographs. Stereo photographs are preferable, and serial photographs are required for early identification of progression. So everyone should know how a normal optic nerve looks like. It follows the ISNT rules, and horizontal cup is much more than the vertical cup. How to identify a cup margin? Obviously, see the scleral ring, watch the blood vessels over how they come over the optic nerve, and see the inner cup margins. So area between is the neuroretinal rim. So here also inner cup margin and the outer NRR. Now see the circumlinear vessels, they are either superiorly or inferiorly. Inferior is more common, and normally they rest on the inner margin of NRR. So they help us in identifying the inner cup margin. There are various signs of glaucoma. We will see them. So most important is the disc size, because the cup is dependent on this. Large cups are there in large discs. So this is very, very important. So small discs, you can identify with this technique. So see how the small optic nerve and the distance between the fovea centralis. So here it is almost 2.5. This is a small disc. A moderate disc, you can see the distance is just 2 disc diameters, and the large disc, it is just 1 and 1.5 disc diameters. So you can identify grossly whether the discs are small or large. High CD also, do not label each and every patient as having glaucoma. You need to investigate these patients because there can be physiological. Myopia obviously gives us we don't know whether it is glaucoma, but you need to document, and because this is a diagnostic glaucoma, and investigate accordingly. Tilted myopic disc, the thin NRR can be seen temporarily, but this is because of the oblique insertion, and here also you need to document them. Don't forget tilted disc syndrome, because this is not glaucoma. This is a typical entity and which is seen bilaterally as an oblique disc insertion. Symmetry is definitely a sign of glaucoma, and you need to investigate, because this is symmetry is seen in almost 98% of patients, and 0.2% of significance. If it is there, it should not be ignored. If there is vertical enlargement of the cup, vertical enlargement in an oval disc can be normal. but vertical enlargement and thin NRR, always see red field photographs. If you see RNFL defects bitemporally like here, definitely it is glaucoma. So pallar cup discrepancy is a pathognomonic sign because the cup would be definitely much more than the pallar here, and it would be accompanied by an RNFL defect. So cupping, if more than pallar, is definitely a glaucoma, but pallar, if it is much more, and if it is on NRR, it is definitely not glaucoma. So again, rim pallar in glaucoma is very, very rare, and you have to look for other findings. Like in this patient, you can see there was pallar of on NRR temporally in both the eyes, and even if the ONH and OCT findings were showing glaucomatous-like defects, but we wanted to investigate because it is not a glaucoma. And you can see that there were chronic microvascular ischemic changes and other changes of cerebral atrophy. Multiple changes were there. So any pallar is not glaucoma. Like in this patient, there is a cherry red spot with multiple emboli. This is a CRAO. And next is a tributary retinal arterial occlusion. Patients of retinitis pigmentosa and glaucoma need to, especially in cine pigmento, if you see a pale disc, you need to see whether it is glaucoma. The visual field defect and the pallar would be totally disproportionate. Concentric atrophy is a sign of glaucoma because the neuronal loss is there in all the sectors. Laminar dot sign is because of the progressive loss of tissue and visibility of the lamina cribrosa. Advanced cupping is seen when there is total loss of neuronal tissue. So coming to vascular signs, there can be splinter or transhemorrhage. This is a significant finding and can be a first sign of glaucomatous damage. More common in NTG and large IOP fluctuation. It precedes RNFL defect, notching, and even visual field defect. Disappears over some time, but this indicates that there is a need for more aggressive therapy. Bayonetting is sign where the vessels suddenly change the direction when they come over the cup margin, and this is because of the loss of neuronal tissue in that particular sector. So bearing of circumlunar vessel is again because of the loss of neuronal tissue, and overpass cupping is the vessels initially bridge over the cup and suddenly appear to collapse in the cup. This is also because of the loss of axons over there. So if it is disc hemorrhage, can be NVD. If it is deep cups, can be totally physiologic, normal, and because of that, it can be an apparent bayonetting. And circumlunar vessels, this is normal on top, and the down is glaucoma. So coming to peripapillary changes, which are RNFL defects. Yeah, I'll just finish off. So these are slit defects. The slit defects again are suspicious, and this is a wedge defect, and this is a diffuse loss of RNFL. Whether it is a normal ONH or not, you can see the RNFL. So definitely NRR may not be an indicator, and you have to see the RNFL. Peripapillary atrophy is also important, and beta atrophy can be seen in myopia and patients of moderate and advanced glaucoma. This PPA is definitely not normal, but you need to document it. Always watch for progression, especially if there is a disc hemorrhage, because it can develop into RNFL. Watch for progression of new development of defect, like in the right eye, there was a new development of RNFL defect, and left eye, there was a wedge defect. So these are anomalous discs, and we need to document and cannot definitely distinguish whether between glaucoma. So just summarizing all the signs: focal atrophy, bearing, laminar dot sign, bayonetting of vessel, thin NRR, pallar cup discrepancy, RNFL thinning, and definitely don't forget the documentation. So comorbidities, always remember this is glaucoma with diabetic maculopathy and PDR, and this is ARMD where with the visual fields were abnormal and not showing proper this thing. Do not ignore large cups. Always document, because large cups may harbor a neurological problem, and you need to document and save the patient from other life-threatening problems. So evaluation of disc. This is last slide. Note the disc size. The NRR is important and not CD. Check for pallar cup discrepancy. Find and observe vascular signs. Evaluate RNFL defects. Note the signs of progression. Keep a high level of suspicion when the findings are atypical. And remember that a patient may have more than one disease. Always keep in mind that everything that looks like glaucoma may not be glaucoma. Thank you.
Thank you, Medha. It was, as usual, wonderful slides. But
Thank
you
you.
finished before time. Why you were hurrying?
I heard buzzer.
Introduce
I
the next
just,
speaker now.
because I could not see the. Okay, so any questions?
Next speaker.
No, that
No,
was the
our
last.
session is
that
over.
was the
Mine
last
was
one.
last on.
I
Okay.
think the next group is waiting. So
Yes.
we may not have time to field
5 minutes
questions.
we have, sir. We can have a
Do
5
we?
minutes for.
No,
Okay.
actually, I'm sorry to say that, but we do not have the time because the time was taken up during the talks. We were supposed to finish this session by 12:50, and actually it has
I think it's
finished.
12:50, ma'am. Just request you to
Yes,
please end
Nikhil.
the session.
Amit, we should go ahead with the next
Yeah,
session.
Yes, sir.
thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank